Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. Today's episode, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, with Kristina Marusic, author of A New War on Cancer and investigative journalist for environmental health.
The Planning Commission podcast is a discussion you never even knew you needed. Sit back, join us for a conversation between a couple of old friends and their guests to talk about all the things that are happening in this wide-ranging profession called planning. Our views are our own and don't reflect those of any national planning organizations or any particular public agencies and only belong to us. So read your commission packet, know your Robert's rules, and enjoy this, the Planning Commission podcast.
Commissioners, welcome back. And let's get a roll call here. Commissioner Minshaw.
Present.
And Commissioner Kostelik.
I am here.
Not
Yeah.
there yet.
Welcome back. We missed you on the last episode or two, and we're feeling good having back. We appreciate that. All right. So we are all in attendance. Our agenda, let's get an approval on that. Our discussion item, our whiskey pairing, our interview, and our lightning round. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All right, perfect. So to our listeners, just a reminder, you can find all our past meetings on our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Go to YouTube, Amazon, Apple, or Spotify and like, subscribe, and certainly give us your feedback. We always appreciate that. All right, so today's episode, oh man, this is a heavy-hitting subject, and we're going to talk about Kristina's book, A New War on Cancer. And boy, where does the planning profession fit in with the prevention, hopefully, of one of our most just debilitating, horrific diseases that we know, chronic disease that I know has affected all of us at various points in our life. What in the world can the planning profession do about it? What are some of the things that are in this book that I think really illustrate the point? That's what we're going to be discussing. And so, commissioners, I'm going to ask you a very general question, and let's see where this takes us. But I'm just curious, where do you think planners, how can we address the prevention of chronic diseases? That's a big, broad, boy, that's a question that we could probably have a 3-day-long discussion on. All of us work in varying capacities in the planning industry. Sabrina, at the county level, but you've also been at the MPO level and the development level, of course, and doing all these different things in different scales. And because of that, your perspective is incredibly broad. And certainly from Don and my perspective, we're on the ground on a sometimes larger scale, sometimes very, 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 very localized scale. So I think we're hitting it from a different vantage point, but I'll open it up. What do you two think? How can planners affect in a positive way the prevention of chronic diseases?
Pause. All right, I'll jump in. Well, like you said, I mean, my work and background's been at a lot of different scales, but I think the one that is still nearest and dearest to my heart is working more in kind of localized economies, whether it's a downtown or an agritourism, or really, I hate to use the keyword like buy local, but I guess just having the awareness of where our products and food come from, and the implications of that from a planning perspective of how do we ensure we have access to things where we are engaging with, we know where it's coming from, we know what they're using on the fields, we know how long it's been in transport, we know where it's coming from in terms of who's taking the raw goods and making it into something else. So just the ability and planning to support those kind of efforts, rather than defaulting to a way that our community and our nation has really gone in the last 3 or 4 generations, I think is huge for planners and just for us as humans.
So the local level making decisions and plans that affect our regional and national logistics to an extent, right? And having to have things delivered from far distances, and the mega production sites that exist, and how much pesticides and herbicides that go into all of those types of things, that local decision can matter, right? That's what you're getting at.
Right. I mean, I think that that's one part. I think the other part is planners is, it really struck me as we were working with, um, truly local farmers and producers of goods, not just farmers, but taking raw goods and things, is our systems really aren't set up from zoning perspectives to marketing to all of that to support that.
Mhm.
It takes a different thing. How can you use land use that's not normally that land use in an agricultural area? Right.
Yeah,
So it's much more, I think, systematic that I'm just even starting to understand that we have a
I
big
like
role
it.
in. We kind of have barriers.
Yeah. I like that. I've been saying for years, we're really good at growing houses. We are really bad at growing food. Like at a local level anyway, right? I think that we're turning the tide on that and people are,
If we could
the
just get
awareness is
corn
high.
syrup into the housing product, we'd probably be pretty good at that. Let's figure
Yeah,
out the
for sure.
corn maze approach to making
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm sure Kristina is going to speak to this, but I'm not by no means saying it's an either or. It's more of just having the flexibility and creativity to help folks who are trying to keep those things in our lives.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Don, what do you got?
You're about to go into a comprehensive plan effort or maybe a sub area plan. Raise $30 and buy postcards of your city from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I bring that up because we had a project here in Boise about 15 years ago with the Bodo development, Boise downtown. Went through all this process. Comes out, they found some underground storage tanks that they didn't know of before. And on my desk was a postcard from 1970s of Capitol Boulevard in Boise showing it lined with gas stations and car lots. And I'm like, well, we could have told you with one look at this $2 postcard I got on eBay that you were likely to find that stuff. And I think I bring that up, and in the book we're talking about today, there was the discussion of an elementary school built on the site of a toxic waste dump because the land was gifted to the school district.
Yeah.
In the 70s. And I mean, I think we're getting better, but we have very poor localized records of things like that. Or if we have them, we're certainly not integrating them into our planning and zoning processes.
Yeah. That's well said. It's funny you marked that point in the book because I think I marked that same exact spot because it was such a profound paragraph there. I might read it a little bit, but yeah, so both great points, and I really do think that our planning profession is waking up and has taken some major steps forward in the recognition that we have a major role with health. I look at the transportation sector all the time and think, oh my gosh, we realize how much toxic air is along our arterials and freeways. And yet, how often are we stuffing people near them because that's where, we end up saying, well, that's the appropriate place for high density residential. Oh, perfect. So we're just going to, saturate folks who are living right there near this soup of an airstream because we don't want multifamily in other parts of our city, right? The whole NIMBY argument and stuff. And anyway, it can go on and on about all these types of things. And I think Kristina's book is definitely what I love about this book is that it so humanizes this issue, man. And it's in just page after page about examples in people's lives who are affected by the built environment and other aspects of cancer. And so we'll get into that in just a second, of course, but let's turn our attention to our whiskey pairing. We're going to do a double dose on this one. Don, you hit it up first, and then I'm going to go with one too.
All right. Yeah. So one, I think our theme music for this should be Toxic Waltz by Exodus, but that's going way back into my heavy metal stuff. So we can use that as the bumper music. I'm going to go with a cocktail called the Toxic Waste. And probably for anybody over age 22, this is probably not going to be appealing at all, but we know we've got an audience that skews younger. Top shelf vodka is what's specified here. Your mileage may vary on that. Midori, blue curacao, orange juice, and lemon lime soda. It's a great looking nuclear green colored cocktail. So Toxic Waste. So since we're going with two, beat that, Danley.
I feel like I've graduated from drinks called that in my life. I'm established in my now late mid 40s, and I'm not going to the bar ordering that drink. I mean, I don't know. Give me something neat and made well, and then I'll be happy. But all right, we'll roll with that one. Okay, so it comes a little story. So, what is a preventer of chronic disease? Well, good antioxidants, and you can find those loaded in red wine, right? And particularly certain red wines. So when I started to do some contract work with Blue Zones like I'm doing now, I started to jump into the books and read everything I could. And I kept reading about this story of the Cannonau wine. And Cannonau is a particular type of wine that's made over in the Mediterranean. And I'm like, I don't see, this is where I'm an idiot. I'm a total idiot. I'm like, ooh, I feel like this is going to give me some sort of superpower. I'm like, it's just wine, right? Like, but I felt like I got to go check it out. I couldn't find it for anything. Finally, I go to the big mega Albertsons where they have the huge wine selection, and I'm greeted by the sommelier, and of course he has a British accent, right? I'm just like, it's Boise, for crying out loud. There's like 3 people that have a British accent, but he happens to be one. All right, so what can I help you with? All right, fine. This is what I'm looking for. Deadpan looks at me and he goes, Blue Zones, huh? And I'm like, wait, what? So they had one bottle, and I had it, and but he tells me the story that he was a wine purveyor. He had a shop over in Portland, and one day, all of a sudden, this horde of older ladies comes into the door, and they're like asking him, Canada, do you have Canada? And he's like, what the heck is going on? What are you talking about? And they start telling him about the book and Blue Zones, and he said from that point forward, he had to keep it stocked, incredibly well. So I'm gonna go with Canada wine. I did drink it. It was fine. I didn't have any ability to see into the future or fly or anything like that. My heart might have been a little happier that day. So there you go.
Well, maybe
All
with
right.
the new Blue Zones documentary, we're going to see it in boxes on the shelf soon because the demand's going to be so high.
I think so.
I would say 2 things, Chris. One is, when you describe wine as fine, there's a problem. You shouldn't be drinking it. And then secondly, I'm pretty sure you were totally profiled.
Oh,
you
I
probably had your
was.
I Love Planning shirt on, and he's like, yeah. They just sort you as you come in. So
yeah. Okay.
He had his check stub from Blue Zones going, see, I'm official.
yeah.
I omitted those details. I apologize. You're right. That's 100% true. All right. So before we turn our attention to our interview, just a quick reminder, we want to thank our partners at Plan Edison and take a quick moment. And if you would like to support today's podcast, go over, sharpen your urban planning skills, and advance your planning career by going to Plan Edison's courses, which offer 300 different courses on cutting-edge planning topics and skills such as parking reform, missing middle housing, equity analysis, and climate resilience. Reminder, visit courses.planedison.com/PC10 to take advantage of an exclusive offer for Planning Commission podcast listeners. All right, well, without further ado, let's bring in our guest, Kristina Marusic, who again has an incredible title. In addition to being author, investigative journalist. We're all envious of that. I think particularly Don, given his journalism roots.
Yeah, sports writing was not very investigative. So
no. And a journalist for environmental health. Kristina, welcome to the Planning Commission podcast.
Hey, Chris, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. It's Environmental Health News is the publication.
Oh, I missed the news. Okay,
All
Environmental
good.
Health News, my fault. Error on Danley's part. All right, Kristina, with that, give us a little bit about you, your background. How did you fall into this? I mean, such a deep dive and a really weighty conversation about cancer and our cities, our states, and all the regulation of different things. My goodness, there's so much in this book. But tell us about you, your background, and then how you came across this subject and why it meant so much to write about it.
Thank you. This issue is really personal to me. When my younger sister was 25 years old, she was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And thyroid cancer usually runs in families, but no one else in our family had ever had it. No one has since. So her doctors at the time said, in this kind of offhanded way, in that case, if there's not a genetic component, then environmental factors might be involved. But when we asked, follow-up questions, they really didn't have much information they could share with us about that. And when we went kind of Googling on our own for answers, we also really weren't able to find anything that was very satisfactory. And as you mentioned, I'm an investigative reporter. So I took this question into my work, as you do. And a few years ago, I wrote a multi-part series for Environmental Health News on how Western Pennsylvania, where I live, I'm in Pittsburgh, my sister's here too, has disproportionately high rates of a handful of types of cancer that are strongly linked in the scientific literature to exposure to pollutants. And I wrote about, what those pollutants are, where they are in our air and where they are in our water. I talked to lots of experts about this, and I really tried to dig into, how is our environment in this region impacting our health, specifically when it comes to cancer and our rates of these certain types of cancer, which I learned did include thyroid cancer. That's one of the ones that's elevated here. And that series won some awards, and I got a really nice note from a publisher saying, congratulations, I think this series is really important. Would you have any interest in expanding this into a book with a more national focus? And 4 extremely long years later, this is that book. It was published with Island Press. So my sister's doing great. She had her thyroid removed and went through treatment. She's been in remission for more than a decade, and she still lives in Pittsburgh and has 2 super cute kids who I love being an aunt to. But I was also very aware that, she was one of the lucky ones, and that she, like anyone else who has gone through what she went through, having cancer, would have much rather had prevention than a cure if that was an option available to her.
Oh.
Yeah. So you mentioned Pittsburgh and your personal story and finding out how prevalent that was in your area. But your book also talks about multiple references to other cities through the United States with very high carcinogenic exposure. What would surprise just the average American, or even a planner who maybe has a bit more observation of the topic? What would just surprise us?
I think people are generally surprised to learn that certain types of industrial pollution are still really poorly regulated throughout the United States at both the federal and the local levels. So this is certainly true where I live here in Pittsburgh, where we still have remnants of the steel industry. There are a number of U.S. steel facilities here that regularly violate the Clean Air Act because it's cheaper for them to do that and just pay the fines than it would be for them to upgrade and modernize their pollution controls on these very old facilities that are making ingredients to make steel. And that pay to pollute model exists in a lot of cities where it's just cheaper and easier to pay the fines than it would be to stop putting poison into the air, unfortunately. Another example I explore in the book is ethylene oxide emissions. And ethylene oxide is this sterilizer that's used for certain types of medical supplies. And a few years ago, EPA put out a report saying that the agency realized it was 30 times more carcinogenic than they originally had estimated based on new science, and that a whole bunch of communities with these medical sterilization facilities in them had very high cancer risk as a result. And since that report came out, the EPA has worked with these facilities to reduce emissions, but the FDA still requires the use of this specific chemical to sterilize this equipment. And the EPA has been working on new regulations to kind of update those emission requirements, but it hasn't gotten done. So it's all kind of just like voluntary and based on the goodwill of these industries. And they're also, there's some public pressure because obviously there's a PR component here, but there are lots of class action lawsuits popping up in response to this for people who live near these facilities and have developed cancer. But a lot of people who live throughout the United States near these facilities or send their kids to school near these facilities just have no idea that they're there and that this cancer risk exists in their communities. So these kind of specific sources of industrial pollution are a big concern, but in all urban places, as you mentioned, Chris, traffic emissions are the biggest culprit when it comes to, carcinogenic air pollution. And that's directly related to planning. And some of that can be mitigated through good planning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
you
awesome.
bring up a great point on that, because I think there's a perception out there that, well, we're cleaner than we used to be, but we've also introduced other things into that environment. I saw, and getting back to the traffic side, and I think it's become more and more of a debate with electric vehicles, is just the microparticles from tire wear, and studies reading in the Seattle area of it killing salmon because it's in the waters and things. And that's something that, again, we're not going to solve that part with electric vehicles. And so in some ways it's whack-a-mole on that. So are we getting cleaner? Are we getting better? Or are regulations just addressing something we knew from 30 years ago and we've not modernized that perspective?
I think we're getting better and we're getting cleaner in some ways, and very importantly, in some places. Certainly, we have a better understanding of the health harms of something like diesel fumes now than we did 20 years ago. And a lot of good work has been done to reduce the number of diesel vehicles on the road. So in general, kind of everywhere there's traffic, we have an improvement, at least on that front, where we're all breathing less benzene and other cancer-causing chemicals from
Less
diesel fumes.
benzene.
Yeah, that's always good news. And some cities have a lot of good programs aimed at things like having healthier buildings. But the problem with all of these solutions is also that they aren't applied equitably, right? So some cities like Flint, Michigan, still don't even have access to clean and safe drinking water, let alone big, new, clean, healthy infrastructure investments. And for the book, I spoke with the founder of this nonprofit called the Healthy Building Network. His name is Bill Walsh, and he was involved with the establishment of the U.S. Green Business Council's LEED standards. I'm sure you're all familiar with those. They eventually became the most widely used green building standards in the world. They're really important in helping us get energy efficiency into our buildings. But the Healthy Building Network, at the time when these standards were being developed, pushed for more health considerations, specifically in the LEED standards. So, for example, they wanted to give LEED credits to buildings that didn't use PVC, polyvinyl chloride, which is the most toxic plastic on the planet. And it's also the most widely used plastic material for building and construction parts. PVC contains all kinds of nasty stuff like phthalates and cadmium, which are linked to hormone disruption, reproductive harm, and cancer risk. It's also made with vinyl chloride, which is less hazardous for people who are in buildings, but it's extremely hazardous all throughout the manufacturing and supply chain. It's the chemicals that were involved in that East Palestine, Ohio train derailment that was all over the news with the big explosion recently. Those trains were carrying chemicals to make vinyl chloride that would eventually be used in PVC. So when we talk about the toxicity of these products, I think it's important to think not just about how they impact building inhabitants, but what they're doing all throughout their life cycle and through the supply chain. But anyway, the LEED certification standards didn't end up adopting those credits because sometimes PVC is more energy efficient than other options. And a lot of times, you mentioned whack-a-mole, Don, and a lot of times that is, you have to sacrifice one thing to achieve another. And it's this really tricky balance of kind of weighing all the pros and cons.
It's a least harm philosophy, given we're kind of so far down that path, right?
Right. You have to just think of it as harm reduction kind of at a certain point. But still, now the LEED certification standards, even when they do include credits for using like non-toxic building materials, they're often not worth enough points to really incentivize that in the same way that the energy credits work. So I think, overall, we are seeing some really big improvements. There are areas where we could do more, and I think there's a lot more we could do to make these improvements be applied more equitably, instead of being limited to people who are in wealthier communities.
Excellent. And I would challenge a few different notes here. Any planner across this country, look at just life expectancy by census tract, for crying out loud. Do a very basic high level analysis such as that. Put a map together of your own city, county, whatever. And I promise you, you're going to see some disparities that pop up that, it starts to get you asking questions, and some of it's going to be related to the things that we're talking about. Maybe some of it's different, but you're going to see places we've seen upwards of 12 to 14 year differences right across the streets, and you just kind of go, how is that possible? And a couple other things that come to my mind, I'm going to challenge our listeners to, man, I dare you to type into a Google search or whatever your search engine of choice is, Soda Springs, Idaho, and look at the phosphate plant that's there. The Monsanto, and I'm going to name names, plant that goes into so much of our fertilizers, and tell me that this stuff doesn't have an effect, because you're going to see something that looks like something out of Lord of the Rings, for crying out loud. And my favorite part of that, side note, is on the road to get there, there's a sign in our state that says, Idaho, too great to pollute or too great to litter. And like, that's in the background. Like, wait, what? But Kristina, I want to ask a question about, unlikely heroes. That's a theme that you sort of explore in this subject or this book. And in so many cases, over and over again, you just personalize this. So I want to just take a quick second and read this. And then I want to have you follow up on the question about, who do you have more faith in, our government or on the ground people and organizations that are really trying hard to clean up our act? So let me read this excerpt from your book. So, after noticing that our community experienced high rates of birth defects, miscarriages, cancer, epilepsy, asthma, and kidney disease in the 1970s, Gibbs, referring to Lois Gibbs, right, discovered that her children's elementary school in Niagara Falls, New York, was built on top of a 21,000-ton toxic waste dump formerly owned by the Hooker Chemical Company, which had sold it to the school district without doing any cleanup. And we know those stories about school districts begging for free land, right? So Gibbs was a housewife with 2 young children and no prior experience in activism, but she organized her neighbors and led a years-long battle that eventually led to the evacuation of more than 800 families and an extensive cleanup of the Love Canal in 1978. Finally, ultimately, Gibbs' work led to the creation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Superfund program. Holy cow. A mother of 2, housewife, led to the Superfund program because of what she unearthed. And 800 families not just being affected, evacuated, for crying out loud. So if you can, take a moment and share this unlikely hero theme that is consistent throughout your book.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Lois Gibbs' story is so powerful, and she's still an activist. She's still out there kind of leading the charge on conveying the importance of environmental health and helping other communities get cleanups done. And I think, as I started learning about this topic, you mentioned at the start of the conversation that this is a heavy topic. And I think it's really easy to quickly get to this place where you're like, well, everything gives us cancer, so that sucks, and I'm going to just not
Right.
worry about any of it because it's way too much to think about, or go to a place of kind of despair or overwhelm. And as I started researching this and conducting interviews, I found that when I talked to people who had devoted their lives and their careers to finding solutions to this problem, and when I heard their stories about, the things in their personal lives that drove them to this work and made them feel connected to it and made them want to keep going, even though it's this kind of uphill battle, that really made me feel less despair. It made me feel more optimism and more hope. And it made me feel like I could make a difference too. It made me feel inspired and want to get involved. And so I wanted to tell those stories in the book. The book addresses these problems, but it's really focused on stories about the people who are advocating for solutions and some of the solutions they've achieved that have made a huge difference in all of our lives. And we oftentimes don't even know it, right? That people were kind of doing this work on our behalf and we were benefiting. So I hope that reading those stories does the same thing for readers and leaves people feeling, more hopeful and optimistic than despairing.
And it attaches to something. It's here's these personal stories. It's grassroots. It's built up. It's not some 500-page congressional report kind of thing that you're summarizing and synthesizing. So I think from the planning profession, bringing these kind of very technical things down to these levels also helps, especially out in the Soda Springs and the smaller places where maybe the educational background and just overall experience isn't there. Sabrina, you had?
I do. Essentially kind of the same thing you're saying. How do you inspire folks to make the difference rather than overwhelm that you feel like you can't do anything? So far for listeners, I mean, tell us more about what do you feel like has been working and really that built environment in the planning profession, around toxic health or environmental health or public health. Where do you see momentum of, ways that we can say you can make a difference? Don't get stuck in that place of being overwhelmed, especially at the local level where, most folks are interacting the most, state, local, cities, counties.
Mm-hmm. We're seeing some really big improvements. I talked about building materials a little bit, and we've seen some really big improvements in recent years in being able to source and access healthier building materials. It's kind of a weird industry where there's this like built-in lack of transparency. If you're buying construction materials, it doesn't usually come with an ingredient list in the same way that food or personal care products, makeup, cosmetics, shampoo come with an ingredient list. But if you're trying to buy healthy building materials, it can be really hard to even track that information down. So there have been some organizations who've done a ton of work to make it easier to track down and find healthy building materials. And this is, you asked about the local level. This one's much a little bigger picture, but the Healthy Building Network developed this database called Pharos that provides hazard and exposure information on more than 180,000 chemicals that are used in hundreds of building products. And it's specifically for planners and architects and contractors to have access to this information on behalf of clients who want healthier buildings. And Google, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, worked with that Pharos database to develop a healthy building program that was used by their architects to build Google offices all over the world. And so when we see, the biggest companies in the world are concerned about this and are using these resources that help with transparency that is not getting done through regulations here in the US, I think that's, promising. And I also think in the absence of meaningful regulations, there's been a lot of success creating market pressure around some of these things. One example I talk about in the book is that until 2015, formaldehyde was used to hold together the fiberglass in bat insulation, which is that stuff that's used between the walls and the frame of a building. But Healthy Building Network and a bunch of other advocacy groups ran this huge campaign asking manufacturers of residential fiberglass information in the US and Canada to stop using that because they found this equally effective non-toxic alternative that didn't cost more. It might have even cost a little less, which I think contributed to the success of this program. And every manufacturer of residential fiberglass in the US and Canada voluntarily and completely phased out the use of cancer-causing formaldehyde in favor of this non-toxic alternative. And over time, that market shift reduced emissions of formaldehyde from bat insulation factories by about 90%. So from 600,000 pounds in 2005 to 60,000 pounds in 2014. And the part that 10% that was left was for industrial buildings that weren't part of the residential push. So that's, there was no regulation that made them do that. This was just pressure from grassroots organizations, and the cost savings, of course, was effective. Home Depot's decision to stop buying wood from endangered forests after pressure from Greenpeace is another example of how that market pressure can work. After Home Depot did that, Lowe's and IKEA followed suit. So now, even though that's not regulated, that's not required by law, all the biggest sellers of lumber in the world are doing this, are avoiding endangered forest.
Yeah. So it sounds like awareness and advocacy can have just as much, if not more, impact on how that's occurring than just our regulation or our formal actions.
Yeah, I think ideally, I always get a little worried when we're just at the mercy of the goodwill of giant corporations, which is kind of what that comes down to, because at any point, if they decide like, oh, that's not economically favorable anymore, they could just stop doing it. So in an ideal world, we do have regulations that kind of, you know, force these sectors to do the right thing. But in the meantime, if we can get it done through market pressure, that's also a really powerful tool. And sometimes
and I would
quicker.
say
And
even
maybe that's the follow-up. Maybe that's the
Yeah.
follow-up, right? You're getting the awareness, the advocacy, and then you're
Yeah.
bookending it with making sure it continues.
Yeah, versus 10 years of regulatory review to get something to happen. It happened. Let's circle back around and come back with the right regulatory component.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It makes me look like I'm looking around my desk right now going, oh my God, what is happening? What's the coding on these baseball cards and this sticker and all of that? So that's what your book did to me. And
Yeah,
Sorry
if
about
it's
that.
putting on your baseball cards, you're probably in deep trouble because aren't they stacked up everywhere? I mean, everybody's got that big stack of baseball cards somewhere.
no, I just got these for my birthday, but I'm looking at like the plastic coating and stuff on it going, I don't know.
Well, if you just stop licking them, I mean, I think you'll be all right. I don't know. Kristina, I'm just curious about, you know, one of the things, and I'll go back to our smaller communities or even our larger cities. You're in a very large city in America that obviously has been grappling with this push and pull of toxicity economics. And another place I visited in the last year is down in the Bakersfield, California area, and this neighborhood of Oildale. And you talk about a different oil city throughout the book. But if anybody, and I would again challenge you, go look, in this case, Google Earth at Oildale, if you're not familiar with it. I've never seen anything like this. I've never, and not even close. The number of oil derricks out in this desert landscape, there's not a tree for probably 50 square miles, right? And it's just the old oil derricks up and down, thousands of them, you know, and you're going, holy cow, it's amazing. But I'm wondering if you can just talk about a little bit this discussion about that local economy, and you know, our workers kind of being convinced, I got to hold on to that job, but yet on the other hand, you're going, yeah, but that job is killing us. And I mean, I'm just curious about, is there any hope in that dialogue? I don't know if you have a good answer for it, but I'm sure it's been something that was, you know, quite extensive in the research of this book.
That does continue to be a real push and pull in Pittsburgh. Sometimes we'll see, you know, if there's like a community meeting about US Steel's pollution, the company will ask employees to come in their work uniforms and essentially like protest additional regulations, even though, or enforcement of existing regulations, even though those regulations would protect workers the most, right? They're the ones who are closest to all of this dangerous pollution on a kind of daily basis. But I do think there's some hope here. There's a really cool organization called the Blue Green Alliance, which is specifically building partnerships between environmental advocacy groups and labor groups and unions. And they've been really effective at kind of bridging that gap and saying, you know, one of the things that should come with a good union job and worker rights is also protection from environmental harms in your workplace and from pollution that could harm your family if you live in the community where you work. And so I think you know, those kinds of partnerships are really promising and give me hope for kind of where that's all headed.
All right. Well, this has been quite the discussion. Dawn, I don't know if you have maybe one more question before we turn it over to the lightning round. Kristina, maybe Dawn has one more in a minute, but real quick, I'm just curious, what was your biggest epiphany taking away from this book, or maybe an epiphany you hope that the reader takes away in reading it?
I think I kind of said this already, but I really hope that rather than contributing to anyone's feeling of overwhelm that we all kind of have about the state of the world right now, that the book makes it clear that there are solutions to this available, and that there are people who are working really hard and have achieved a lot when it comes to getting them done, and that there's a role for all of us in this kind of movement to make our world healthier and safer. And that, you know, we're not all gonna become scientists or researching this or lobbyists or even grassroots activists, but that there is a role for everybody in this, and that there are small things we can all do that collectively can make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think the other lesson is just if your town name has the word oil in it, probably a decent one. Or I think of a place here in Idaho that's been subject to Superfund of Smelterville
Oh, wow.
for that. But what it revealed to me in both the book and certainly a recommendation for planners on this, and Chris knows this from our work on some recent comprehensive plans, I tend to look at it of like, we want to do a citywide comprehensive plan, but we have to look at the pockets of our city that are more exposed and more challenged to things, and let that be the focus of changing our orientation, looking at specific needs, looking at specific pollutants. But we just want to take this broad Daniel Burnham, make no small plans. But I think we've got to get down to those levels for the neighborhoods and communities for that, and kind of shift our focus. And I think your book is one revelation of that, because as much as zoning was intended to zone these uses to do away with population impacts of things like industrial pollution, we're still working to satisfy that original goal. So that was just as a 20-year practitioner, my take from it, that maybe some confirmation bias of my own opinions about it. But thank you for doing that.
Yeah. So, all right, real quick though, I know Dawn was supposed to have the last question, but I have a question pulling us away from planners, right? Or our planning profession. So when I was reading through your book and also just taking a look at some of your other work, all of us are still a mom or a dad or a brother or a sister or, a daughter or a son. So much of what your book and work covers is just increasing the awareness. If you could give kind of one tip, I was going to use this for lightning round, but it was too long. If you have like just one tip for all of us of like, what do you do first to raise your awareness? Where would you point our listeners?
Read my book. That's a great
Not the first book. All right. Number 2 tip.
That's
all right,
a great opportunity for a plug. I think one of the recommendations I make in the book is following some of the organizations that are leading this work and really championing these solutions on social media is a really quick way to kind of get that into your newsfeed, see what issues they're prioritizing. It also makes it easier to, if we're considering banning a toxic pesticide at the federal level, and we all need to call our legislators in 1 week before the decision is made, it's good to know about that in a timely way, right? And so I think that's one really easy way to just kind of expand your awareness, and then also have easy opportunities to chip in towards solutions.
Thank you. I think that's a really great takeaway for us all.
All right, so we're going to transition over to the lightning round and ask you some fun, nonsensical questions to end our time with you. But before I do, let's make sure our listeners know, go over to Island Press Publishing and make sure that you enter Plan Commish, because if you do, you will get this wonderful book, A New War on Cancer, that we've been talking about. And you too can be an unlikely hero and get 25% off just for entering that code. So we want to thank our partners at Island Press. Okay, lightning round. You ready? Here we go. All right. Ready. I want to know, who is your favorite movie investigative journalist? This is in your DNA. There's so many movies that have been made with that sort of a theme. You have any favorites?
The first one that comes to mind is Spotlight, which is kind of the classic, most famous one about reporters in Boston uncovering sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. And it was one of the rare times when I got to see, like, when watching that movie, I was like, wow, investigative journalists are cool. It was one of the first media portrayals I saw where I thought like, oh, wow, this makes us look really badass.
I mean, I was looking behind you to see if you had like an Upton Sinclair prayer candle or something sitting back there.
Do you know where to get one of those?
Yeah, we should probably.
You can order them online. You can you can make your own on there. Have you ever thought about looking at the toxicity of the terrible towels flown by Steelers fans?
You know, I bet I don't think I'd be very popular in Pittsburgh if I broke that story.
You got to remember that's coming from a Bears fan, so be careful. All right, I got
True.
one that's different. And it was hard to find kind of light and fun ones because so much of your work is just really impactful. But I saw and read one of your articles that said around the world, around the world in 21 savory pancakes. Okay, so what is the best in your mind savory pancake? What's the best and then what was the strangest?
I love that you found that piece. That was from my freelancing
it's the foodie
days.
part.
Yeah, you know, right after the 2016 presidential election, I was like, I need to stop writing about serious topics, and I did some food writing, and it was like a very happy period in my career. My go-to is a scallion pancake. I love a Chinese scallion pancake. I keep them in the freezer and make them at home pretty often. I lived in Taiwan for a year, and one of my favorite breakfasts there was scallion pancake with scrambled egg, and it gets a slice of like processed American cheese inside and some soy sauce and chili.
Wait a minute. If ever there's a food that's gonna bring about some cancer, I'm pretty sure processed American cheese is on the top
for
of that
sure.
Processed American cheese in Taiwan, you know.
It doesn't melt. It just sort of looks at you when it gets heated up, right? It's like, I don't know, what do you want me to do?
No,
right?
They melt really well. They're
All
only
right,
good quality. They melt really well.
Yeah, I know what the Danley girls are having for breakfast. They'll be like, hey, we're gonna get you some culture. We're gonna have a savory pancake. And they're like,
I will have you know that Dad makes some wicked pancakes. In fact, on Halloween, I got up early and made them some ghost and witch pancakes to start their day. But they did not have American cheese. Maybe I'll try to sneak one of those in there sometime. All right. According to the good old interwebs, the top 3 Pittsburgh musical acts or bands consist of Kristina Aguilera, Wiz Khalifa, or Mac Miller. So which of those are you seeing? And maybe which one are you going, no way, I'm not seeing that one? Throw the Pittsburgh favorites people under the bus. Go ahead.
I mean, they're all from here. So that's the whole basis for that favoritism. They're all from Pittsburgh. So it's just like hometown loyalty rather than musical talent. There's a park really near my house that has a playground with a blue slide. It's called Blue Slide Park, and it's referenced in a Mac Miller song. And I know that people have, you know, I've been to that park many times, and I know people have a lot of love for Mac Miller. And part of the reason is that, like, you know, we see stuff he references in his music around town all the time. So I'd go with him.
He's really representing.
Not the most creative name for that part, but
no, yeah, very on the nose.
All right, thumbs up, thumbs to the side, thumbs down. French fries on the sandwich at Primanti Brothers.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
I love French fries
that
on
experience.
I mean, how could a sandwich or a salad be made worse with the addition of French fries?
Yeah.
It could only be better.
That's going to be our legacy as a country forever. It's just French fries, right? I mean, my goodness. I think we nailed that one. Mostly. All
right, well, let's stay on French fries. Fry sauce. Yes or no?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, there you go. Okay, she just said fry sauce. So apparently you need to come visit Idaho.
Wait, I don't know what it is. What's fry sauce?
I know, that's what I said. You got to come visit Idaho. So
it's a delectable combination of mayonnaise, ketchup, some dill pickle juice, and you can maybe add some seasonings in there.
At least pepper.
Yeah, I'm in on
that. We were at a Mariners baseball game and kind of up in the skybox area, and we're like, okay, you know, we're going to eat and watch part of the game. And we said, hey, can we get some fry sauce for French fries? And literally the guy just like stared at us. I think he thought, we're like, all right, just how about some mayonnaise and ketchup and we're good. And yeah, he had no clue. So there you go. There's your, since you're a foodie and you write a lot about foods, there's your
fry sauce and finger steaks.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
the other Idaho delicacy.
What's that?
Oh, here we go.
So take the concept of a chicken breast strip, right? A chicken tender, and you just cut sirloin steak into strips, bread it and fry it and dip it most of the time in cocktail sauce.
Oh,
fry
wow.
Sauce. No,
wow.
fry sauce.
Fry sauce, yeah, barbecue sauce.
Fry sauce, not just for fries.
That's right.
We're really representing here in Idaho on the war on cancer. We're doing our part with deep fried everything and dunking it in mayo-based condiments. We're leading the league, buddy. Hey, I love my fry sauce. Don't get me wrong. It's glorified Thousand Island. That's all it really is. So
there's no islands.
No.
don't be fooled. Don't be
We're
fooled.
gonna have
It's
a
not-
whole episode about the merits of fry sauce.
I'd listen.
All right. Well, Kristina, we appreciate your time joining us on the Planning Commission podcast. We thank you for your wonderful work in this wonderful, great book, New War on Cancer. For those of you watching, here's that book one more time. And again, head over to Island Press, get your discount by entering in the discount code. But Kristina, thank you for joining us today on the Planning Commission podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun chatting with you all.
Good. All right. To our listeners, just as a reminder, head over to our website, the www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Like, subscribe, send us a message. Tell us if we're doing really well or if we just suck, something, but give us some feedback. We appreciate that. Always trying to do better as much as we possibly can. Fellow commissioners, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll set the motion, but I got one point of discussion to point out.
Boy.
Well, this is for our listeners and others for Island Press. It's a nonprofit. They clearly lead the league in this subject area. Ordering from their site helps that effort a lot more than going to your standard online thing. So you get the discount, but you're also supporting the organization that's helping to underwrite a lot of publications that might not otherwise make it to the fore. So with that, I will have a motion to adjourn.
And I will second that.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Hey, everybody. Commissioner Danley here. Would you like to see more? Hear more? Well, we got you covered. Go to our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. It's got everything you want. Guests, past episodes, the video, the audio, even our whiskey pairing, links to everything about all the people we've had on, books, websites, you name it. It's unbelievable. If you want to reach out to us, please. We'd be more than happy to chat. You can email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to tweet at us, go for it, @planningcommish. We're also on YouTube with the Planning Commission Podcast channel, Facebook. Heck, send us a carrier pigeon if you need to. We'd love to hear from you about ideas, guests, you name it. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll keep doing our thing. You keep doing yours. Have a good one.